You and welcome to Illuminations. My name is Alex, your Assistant Entertainment Director here on board. Very excited that you're all here with us in Illuminations this morning for our first Cunard Insights lecture of the voyage. I'm very excited to introduce our speaker, who is no stranger to us here at Cunard. We keep having him back time and time again. What a fascinating lecturer he is, and he's going to tell us all about his career in aviation. And this morning is a first in a series of 4 or 5 lectures this week that we will be presenting all about the airline industry. So please, can we have a warm welcome for Captain David Henderson.
Thank you very much, Alex. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, meine Damen und Herren. Do we have a lot of German guests with us this morning? No? Okay, 1, 2. That's about the extent of my German. It's a fantastic pleasure and privilege to be back again with you on this magnificent ship. As David said, I voyage quite regularly with Cunard, or Carnival as it is now, Cunard and P&O, Princess and all the other cruise lines under the wonderful Carnival umbrella. It's a fabulous ship. I love Queen Mary too. She's absolutely gorgeous. I think they gave me 5 talks to start with. They've taken 1 away from me. I don't know why. I think it's to make room for another German talk for our German guests. So 4 talks it's going to be on the days that we spend at sea. The times vary. We're always in this venue, I think, on this particular cruise, but the times do vary, so check your paper, make sure you don't miss it. And the times vary even more for those who forget to adjust their watches. On my last voyage on Queen Mary 2 in here, I actually had passengers standing in the aisles there. It's an incredible sight. Nobody in the seats, just standing in the aisles, you understand, ready for a quick getaway in case they got bored, you know. But I assure you, we won't bore you at all. You're probably just here to get a good seat for whoever comes on after me anyway. So as I say, 4 talks, different times of day, and just check your paper. Now, I always find out, the first day on the ship, there's always a rumor that goes round that Cunard or Carnival pay me vast sums of money to put you off flying. Unfortunately, it's not true. Well, the bits about vast sums of money are certainly not true, I can assure you of that. That's not my job to put you off flying. I take a fairly sideways look at my industry in various aspects of it. As I say, in the next talk, we'll look at air traffic control and how we work with them. Sounds a little bit dry. Don't worry about it. There's about 5 minutes of the history of air traffic control, and then we go all around the world with air traffic controllers from different parts of the world. Some of them are very good, some of them aren't so good. Some of them hate pilots, and it makes for a very entertaining little chat. Then we are going to do, I think the one after that, we're going to do a little talk on aviation medicine, in fact. Again, sounds a little bit dry, but trust me, bear with me. You will find things of great interest to you there, how you can make life better, easier, healthier as you travel. And we look at things like jet lag. Can we overcome jet lag? We look at the myth or fact of deep vein thrombosis, DVT, economy class syndrome, all that sort of thing. And it's a very interesting talk, and I always have very good feedback. Final talk is going to be glamour in the skies, when we look at all our gorgeous cabin crew and how we integrate with them, safety on board the aircraft and that sort of topic. But it's all fairly light-hearted. Now, I have been accused in the past of being a little bit non-politically correct. So I'll make you a blanket apology for that now, and I would ask you, please, just to try and take everything I say, either with a little pinch of salt or the whole salt cellar, whichever you think is appropriate at the time. But nothing is going to upset you, I hope. I won't take questions during the talk. If you've got questions, please feel free to come and see me afterwards. But if I take questions during the talk, it puts us all behind schedule. So I'll take any questions at the end, and then if they're of great interest and I haven't covered it in the talks, I will try and cover it for everybody during the subsequent talks. Now, the other thing which I have to establish at this stage of my presentation is, do we have any other pilots in the audience? 1. Oh, not bad. Oh, God, I might get away with this, you know, guys. I've only got 1. Normally when we've got a lot, 2, 3. Oh, my God, the hands are going up now. Normally when we've got so many American passengers traveling with us, there's a whole forest of hands goes up normally. And especially on the Alaskan cruises, where I think it's 1 in 2 natives of Alaska all have pilot's licenses, because that's about the only way to travel sensibly around Alaska, whether it's a float plane, a ski plane, a land plane with those big low-pressure tires to get around that fabulous state. Anybody else involved? Anybody from immigration or customs or security? Oh my God, I better be very careful here. Oh God, I'm on the thin ice here all the way through today. Well, not so much today, but as the talks go on. Anyway, everybody gets a hammering, so don't worry about it. Pilots get a hammering, air traffic controllers get a hammering, immigration, customs. What do you expect? You all get a hammering, for heaven's sakes. A little conundrum for you before we start. I want you all to assume that you're all pilots, not captains. Don't get any ideas above your station. You're just co-pilots, not captains, okay? Now, I am not the captain in this little scenario I'm going to give you. But you're all co-pilots now. You've been trained up overnight. You're all first officers or co-pilots. And what you are going to do today is go for an interview for an airline. And this is one of the questions which they're going to ask you. They ask you at your interview to imagine this scenario, that you have checked in for a flight as a co-pilot with a captain with whom you have not flown before. Okay? This is quite normal. You will fly a lot of your career with people you've never set eyes on in your life before. So you check in, you do all the paperwork, you go out to the aircraft. Let's say your first sector is flying between London and Bangkok, for example. And you find you've got a lot in common with your captain. You find you both like tennis, you both like a game of golf, you both like Formula One motor racing, perhaps, Six Nations rugby maybe. And so you get on very well. Now what we usually do on a night stop is we get to the hotel, go upstairs, have a shower, get changed, go downstairs, meet in the bar, have a drink, go out, have something to eat, and spend the evening together. So that's it. That's what you do. At 7 o'clock, you go down to the bar. You're just about to walk into the bar when, standing at the bar, you see your captain wearing a dress. The question is, how are you going to address this situation? Are you going to go, oh, bloody hell, turn round and tiptoe away back up to your room and hide for the next 24 hours? Or you just got to walk in and say, nice dress, Captain. Or go back upstairs and put your own dress on or whatever. Anybody got any ideas as to how you would address that situation? Hello, sailor. Nice one. Oh, I didn't say, did I? Oh, it's not often girls get that one right, actually. Talks I do to all ladies groups, they don't get that. It's a lady captain, of course, isn't it? But when I talk to all lady groups, they never ever do that. It's usually blokes, actually, who come up with the correct answer. And they say, why don't you just buy her a drink? Which is the correct answer to that particular little question, that little thing. I don't know if you saw that series on television. It's been on a couple of times now, but with David Williams and Matt Lucas, called Come Fly With Me, it was very funny. And talk about being non-politically correct. Moi, I don't. Look at those two being non-politically correct. They absolutely take every aspect of the airline industry apart. I think even today it gets a PG-15 rating, that, which for a comedy series is quite serious. But they portray people with exactly the people that I have worked with over the years. There's one episode where there's a first-class stewardess called Penny. I don't know if you remember that one. I'll show you a clip from it in a later talk. But Penny is the stewardess who has never worked in anywhere other than first class in her life. And one day in particular, she is then forced to work in the economy cabin. She does not. Penny doesn't know that there are little people like you who sit behind the second door. She doesn't know there's anybody behind there. So anyway, she has to serve them. And she doesn't like it very much. Just before I forget to do this, I've been asked the question many times, if the captain and the co-pilot have both eaten the past its sell-by-date fish, as in that wonderful film Airplane, if you remember that one, where both the captain and the co-pilot are incapacitated, could a pilot with a Microsoft Home Simulator land that aeroplane? My feeling is possibly yes. Possibly. I'm not going to put any money on it, but I would say yes, because you'll be talked down by an experienced pilot, experienced captain in the control tower. Your advantage of having that flight simulator is that you will know what all these knobs and dials and switches and levers and things, what they actually do. Now, it's a very simple airplane, the 747-400. It looks complicated, but we've got all the information on these television screens. And these are so faithfully reproduced on your PC, on your Microsoft simulator, that you will know what all these things are. You will be able to fly a better approach than me, probably. So, if it happens, and they go bing bong, if there is a pilot on board, will he please make himself known to a member of the cabin crew? You know there's something seriously wrong here. And you have to go up to the flight deck and land that aeroplane. Just leave everything as it is, okay? Leave all the automatics engaged, as they obviously almost certainly will be, and listen to the instructions, and you will have a better than 80% chance of landing the aircraft safely. That's my own feeling. Now, if you decide to be the real hero and think, I can fly my Microsoft simulator manually, and you take the autopilot, the automatic pilot out and try and fly it manually, you will crash and die. Of that, there is no question whatsoever. So don't do that. Listen to the guy on the ground. He will talk you down, tell you what to do, when to do it, and I would put a little bit of money on you. I wouldn't bet the entire farm on you. Now, I hope for your sake that none of you here have got children, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, who want to be commercial pilots. Because if you have, and they come to you and they say, Granddad, you couldn't sub me for my pilot's license, could you? And you say, yeah, of course, how much do you want? He is going to turn to you and say, it's about £100,000 sterling. So try and talk him out of it. Try and convince him to get a sensible job, be a chartered accountant or something like that. But that's what it costs now to get your basic piece of paper. It's about £60,000 for the basic license, another £20,000 to say that you can fly that airplane on instruments in certain bad weather conditions, and you will also need £20,000 for your type rating, to fly a certain type of airplane, which airlines now charge you for. Some airlines charge you for that particular type of rating. Now, I guess I was very fortunate in that I knew from a very young age what I wanted to do in life, and civil aviation was always going to be my passion. That was my ambition. And nothing was going to dissuade me from this, not even my dear old father, who rather disparagingly referred to me as the family bus driver to his dying day. But thanks to the books by W.E. Johns, the Biggles books, and Biggles and Algae, I couldn't get enough of all this, and I was weaned on this the romance and the glamour of civil aviation. So when my parents took me on my first flight ever, on a BEA DC-3 Dakota, on the previous slide there, between Aberdeen and Wick. That's where we went, Aberdeen to Wick, and then up to Orkney, where my old mum came from. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was such a fabulous day, even in Aberdeen. Trust me, it gets above freezing in Aberdeen some days. And this was in the middle of summer, and they just cut the aircraft grass, and it was a hot day, so you got that lovely smell of new mown grass. You also had that lovely tarry smell from the tarmac. You had the smell of aviation spirit. You had the smell of hot oil, hot rubber, hot leather. All these smells, they all came together. You get a couple of lungfuls of that, and it is almost instantly addictive. Any pilot in the audience will agree with me on this one. Avgas itself has got the most wonderful smell to it. That's where we're going in Invergordon, just northwest of Inverness there. And I'm not sure where we are. We're somewhere out here, I guess, at the moment in the North Sea. And then we'll be coming round to Glasgow, which is down, it's off the bottom of the map here, and then down to Liverpool. And Dublin, obviously, just to put you in the picture there. So you walk into the cabin on this airplane through these huge big barn doors at the back here, and you walk up this very, very steep cabin, because it was a tail-wheel aircraft. It's quite a steep climb up that cabin there, and we were sitting in these seats right in the front there, in line with the engines. And I managed to peer into this really antiquated cockpit to see the captain sitting in the left-hand seat and the co-pilot sitting in the right-hand seat. And to me, that was just paradise on earth, this cockpit, not a flight deck, a cockpit. It was absolutely fantastic. From that cockpit also came the smell of tobacco. It was pipe tobacco, and the captain swiveled round in his seat and had his pipe. It wasn't lit, I hasten to add, but you could smell that he'd been smoking something on the flight deck. I mean tobacco, nothing else. He turned round. This is in the early 1950s, and that was how it was in those days. There were rules and regulations which were there for the obedience of fools and the guidance of wise men, as you probably know. So we started up, taxied out, got out to the end of the runway, did his power checks on these two little radial Pratt & Whitney Wasp radial engines, and then checked the feathering of the propeller blades. Lovely noise they made. They made a lovely noise, these engines. And then he opened them up to full power, off we went, down the runway, the tail comes up, and a few seconds later we're airborne and climbing away into that wide blue yonder up there. The wheels come up and they get tucked into these little nacelles under the wings here, and off we went to Wick and Orkney. Now, rather than cripple my old man financially in my quest for aviation, much to everybody's surprise, I actually managed to get into university. And doubly fortunately, I was lucky enough to be selected for membership of what's called the University Air Squadrons, which are still in existence today. It's part of the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve. So, as I say, much to everybody's surprise, I managed to get this far in my career. And there we learned to fly basically on this aircraft type here, the de Havilland Chipmunk. The de Havilland, this was actually designed and built in Canada by de Havilland. And it was a fantastic training aeroplane. Her Majesty the Queen very kindly lent us a few of her aeroplanes and flying instructors courtesy of the Royal Air Force. The instructors were full-time RAF officers. This was not a flying club. This is part of the Royal Air Force, and the instructors, full-time instructors in the Royal Air Force, seconded to the University Air Squadrons. And they expected of their students the same standards as would be expected of a cadet pilot or an officer cadet joining the Royal Air Force as a regular officer. So here we were given basic flying training. We were taught meteorology, we were taught navigation, we were taught flight planning, formation flying, low flying, night flying, aerobatics, all of which was taught to the very highest and very demanding standards. This was an excellent training airplane. Easy to fly, but quite difficult to fly well and precisely the whole time, and it showed up any flaws in your flying. It's surprising to me that these squadrons are still in existence, that they have escaped a lot of the government cutbacks in defence spending. So it must be a cost-effective thing for the defence budget that they are recruiting sufficient numbers of high-quality graduates into the armed services, whether it's the Air Force, the Navy, or the Army, thanks to people's exposure to this particular training at a fairly early age as undergraduates. The cost is minuscule, of course, taken as part of taken as percentage of the overall defence budget. As you can see, in those days, I bore a fairly uncanny resemblance to Prince William. Oh no, sorry, that is William, isn't it? Sorry, that's me there. Yeah. Me with my steed. Now, having said I wanted to go into civil flying, I was persuaded by the boss of my university air squadron that the Air Force really, really needed bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young chaps like me. He was wrong. But he convinced me that this was the career for me. He said, "You don't want to go into civil flying." He said, "It's boring." He said, join the Air Force. You'll have a much, much better career. Well, I believed him and found myself in Her Majesty's Royal Flying Club one morning. I must have had a few beers in the mess and signed something. But that was how I finished up in the Air Force. So that was me and my trusty steed in 1965, I think that must have been. Now, Prince Charles learned to fly on the same type of aircraft in 1969. This shows him standing at Prince William's Wings Parade when Prince William had qualified as a pilot, and Charles and Camilla with his very distinctive Chipmunk. This is the exact aircraft that Charles learned to fly on. And we very nearly did not have a King Charles III in waiting. He was very nearly killed in this exact aeroplane. And it happened when they were doing aerobatics. Now, when you're doing aerobatics, you have to be very careful that you're going to use up a lot of airspace, and things happen quite quickly. And you have to make sure there's no other airplanes in your piece of airspace before you start throwing your airplane about. So this they did, and then they dived down to get speed up to pull up into a loop-the-loop maneuver. And as they pulled up into the vertical, there was another aircraft that wandered into their airspace directly above them. The instructor took control. He rolled and pulled the aircraft as hard as he dared to get out of the way of this other aircraft. And his estimates were that they missed the other aircraft by about 20 feet. So that was how we came so close to not having King Charles III in waiting. So that was the basic training aircraft, and then our first jet trainer, that was a small airplane called the Jet Provost at number 1 Flying Training School in Yorkshire. Anybody from Yorkshire, they all hate us because we used to make so much noise. There were 3 airfields within the Vale of York, at Linton, Leeming and Topcliffe, and all the Yorkshire people used to hate us because we were very noisy neighbours, I have to say. That was the basic trainer teaching us basic jet flying, high altitude flying. It wasn't a high performance aeroplane, but it was the transition from the basic piston engined aircraft onto jets. The advanced training was done on this airplane, which you'll probably recognize. It was the airplane which was flown by the Red Arrows for many years, up until about 20 years ago when they were retired, the Folland Gnat. It's probably one of the most exciting airplanes ever built, to be honest. It's absolutely minute, this airplane. You don't so much get into it as strap it on. And it's like sitting on the front of a paper dart, really. And you become part of that airplane. If you imagine the student is probably about 6 foot tall, student sits in the front, instructor sits in the back. Student 6 feet tall, his feet are probably down about there somewhere on the rudder panels. So he becomes absolutely part of that airplane. It becomes an integral part of him. Just to give you an idea of the scale again, that's me. I'm about 6 feet tall. So standing next to the aircraft, the top of the canopy would only be as high as I am. So when you're streaky along the ground with your backside about 2 feet off the ground there, and you're doing 140, 150 knots, that's 170, 180 miles an hour, you get a fair old impression of speed, I can tell you. So that was our advanced trainer. It wasn't the safest airplane in the world, and in the hands of over-exuberant and under-competent students, we had a fairly higher than we would have wished attrition rate on advanced training. From there, it was on to the Hawker Hunter, probably one of the most classic airplanes that we built in the UK. Fantastic airplane. It was good as a high-level interceptor. It was great as a low-level ground attack aircraft. I flew it in this role most of the time. This was about the height I spent, the height off the ground that I spent most of my time, which is fine with me because I don't like heights really, and. So that was fine for me. Anyway, by this time I'd sort of done my time in the Air Force, and it was time to think about where I was going to go, whether I was going to stay in the Air Force or move on and go to our civil flying. So I decided to take my choice and go and join the Civil Aviation Department. And this was the first airplane I flew, which you will all have flown in, I'm sure, over the years. The old Vickers Viscount, a lovely airplane. And a very good basic aeroplane as well, 4 engines, turbo propeller. And then I spent a few years on that, and then I went on to this beautiful airplane here, the Lockheed TriStar. Superb airplane. It was the absolute epitome of modernity of its age. Unfortunately, even most of these now they've all been grounded. It was the first airplane to have a fully integrated, what's called a flight management system. And this is when we have a computer on board which controls the engine power, the engine speed. It controls the speed of the aircraft. It calculates its climb, its cruise, its descent. We had inertial navigation systems, which is a standalone system to navigate the airplane. And the other thing we had on board this airplane, which the girls loved, was an underfloor galley. From about there to there, there was a huge galley in the belly of the airplane where the girls could get down there, prepare all the food, and then send it up into the cabin there in a couple of lifts. And it was fantastic. It was the most popular job on the aircraft because the girls could get down there, get the uniform off, get the T-shirt and jeans on, and never have to have anything to do with passengers. So after many happy years on this airplane, I changed on to the family of Boeings. The first one was the 767, the 757, and I had left BA by this stage to go and join this outfit in the Middle East called Gulf Air. Unfortunately, poor old Gulf Air never really recovered from Gulf War I in 1990, 1991, and now it's been superseded by the new Gulf carriers, Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways, all of whom are very, very good airlines with great products. Anyway, having done 10 years in the Gulf, I then went out to the Far East with Singapore Airlines, flying the 747-400. That was my the last 15 years of my flying career. So that's briefly me, and today we're going to go on a flight from London to Hong Kong. Did anybody fly into the old Hong Kong airport, into Kai Tak? Yeah, there's always a lot of hands go up there. And we try and address the question, was it as terrifying as it seems? Only if you get it wrong, as some of us did. As I say, the next talk is on air traffic control, and then is there a doctor in the house, and then glamour in the skies. That's our final talk, and it doesn't get much more glamorous than that. Whoever that may be, I don't know. Right, we better move on quickly to Hong Kong, I guess. Hop in the aircraft and just fly straight out there, shall we? London, Hong Kong? Yeah, why not? It's not quite that easy as you might imagine. There's a little bit more to it than that. Now, when we are flying long-haul routes, strangely enough, the shortest distance on the Earth's surface is not a straight line. It is actually what's called a great circle track. And you might find that on this cruise, probably not, but if you're doing long-distance cruises across the Pacific or the Atlantic, you'll find the captain referring to Rumline tracks or great circle tracks. I won't go into all the details now, but the great circle track, generally speaking, is the shortest distance between 2 points. And it doesn't look terribly sensible, taking off from London, LHR, London Heathrow, going up over Denmark and then southern Sweden. You think, where is he taking us? And then you go up over Latvia or Estonia, over the CIS, down through Kazakhstan, down through China, and into Hong Kong that way. So that's not set in stone, but that may be one of the routes that we might fly that day. Now, this phenomenon becomes even more apparent when we look at our route, say, between John F. Kennedy Airport in New York and Hong Kong, when we go basically right across the top of the world, almost right across the North Pole there. And that is the shortest distance between 2 points on that particular track. And it does make a huge difference. If you look at the globe, you'd think, nah, you just come round that way, surely. Round that way, but that would be much, much further than going across the top of the world. So generally speaking, we'll be at the airport at least an hour before departure, maybe an hour and a half departure, to do all the paperwork and go through all the briefing. When we get to the airport, we go to an office and we have a gentleman there called our aircraft dispatcher. And he will have done most of the work for us by this stage. He'll have drawn up all the flight plan, he'll have calculated, or he and the computer together will have calculated the fuel we require. You'll brief us on any security aspects, any hazards from a security point of view, any threats towards the aviation industry or our flight in particular. Any technical snags on the aircraft, because you might not wish to know that even if we do have technical snags on the aircraft, we can sometimes dispatch with those technical snags on board the aircraft. Okay, we wouldn't do anything that was going to jeopardize safety, but on this aircraft, for example, we've got 4 engines, 4 generators. If we've got 1 generator not working, we can dispatch with 3 generators online. So that sort of thing enables us to dispatch without delaying the flight, without having any adverse effect on our safety. Now, fuel is always a contentious issue because fuel is so expensive now, and the fuel minimums, although the computer works it out, these are actually sanctioned by accountants. Which, accountants run everything nowadays. The accountants are people who think you can fly an aeroplane with 1.98 pilots. Nobody's explained to them that you actually need 2, right? When they're doing their cost-cutting measures, they say, well, we can get rid of, 1, 2, 2. We can get rid of 27 pilots from this fleet, and we can fly the aircraft with 1.98 pilots per airplane. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. So the accountant and the computer and the dispatcher will then present the captain with this piece of paper, and it says, we are giving you 150 tons of fuel, 150,000 kilograms of fuel. Any captain worth his salt will say, no. We'll take more than that. We'll take a little bit more than that. I used to add a ton for the wife and each of the kids. Right? That was a sort of fair ballpark figure. And this accounts for any delays en route. We might be delayed on the ground for an hour with engines running. We might have air traffic control delays in the air. We might have reroutings in the air. We might not get the altitudes that we require for optimum fuel consumption. So having extra fuel on board just makes sense to me. I never dispatched with minimum fuel. And I would write a note on the log, on the captain's log, stardate 2437. I would put extra fuel carried due expected ATC delays over India or something. And I never had anybody come back and say, what ATC delays over India? There were none. But they can't be bothered checking, you see. So that's it. He will also brief us on how we're going to get out to the end of the runway. At Heathrow, for example, you have to know exactly where they're digging it up, because you know what they say about Heathrow. It's the only building site in the world with its own airport. We came out of it yesterday, and they're still at it. They're going to build and build and build for another 15 years, and then close it, and then build an airport in the estuary, Thames estuary. We'll need to know the en route weather. We will need to know if we're carrying any important passengers. We might be carrying heads of state. We might be carrying heads of government, prime ministers, in which case they will have their own security team, their own marshals on board who may or may not be armed with weapons, ammunition to protect the head of state. So there's that. The most important thing, of course, is the weather at destination. And we're looking probably 12, 14, 15 hours ahead. So the Met man has to look 15 hours ahead for our arrival time at Hong Kong and be able to say, yep, this is the weather you can expect at Hong Kong for your arrival time. You may need to hold for half an hour while some typhoon blows itself through Hong Kong. So we'll give you an extra 30 minutes holding fuel for that. Oh, thanks very much. And a bit more, thank you very much. Now, the cabin crew will normally brief separately to us, but if we are carrying VIPs, CIPs, heads of state, ministers, we'll brief together so that we can keep each other acquainted with the situation that we have in the cabin. If we've got turbulence expected in the first 2 hours of flight, say, then we tell them, don't do your cabin service in the first 2 hours, hold it back, and then once we're through that area of turbulence, you can crack on with it without any interruption from us. So we need to exchange that sort of information. So we get to the aircraft probably about 45 minutes before departure. And you probably notice sometimes, if you've been sitting in the building, you might see one of the pilots coming down from the flight deck, walking round the outside of the aircraft, just doing an external check to make sure the ground engineers haven't missed anything, which they very, very seldom do, I have to say. This could either be done by the captain or the co-pilot, doesn't really matter. If it's a nice summer's day, I'll do it. If it's pouring with rain and freezing cold, then the co-pilot will be doing it, of course. We get our air traffic control clearance in a coded form to our destination, Hong Kong. We then call for pushback from the gate, and when we call for pushback, we don't use the engine thrust. We don't put the engines into reverse thrust to move backwards from the gate. The guy in a tractor comes along, attaches that to the nose wheel there, pushes us back from the gate, and he points us in the right direction for taxiing out, and off we go. We taxi out to get to the end of the runway. By this time, we've got everything all set in the cockpit. We've done all the checks. We've worked out all the speeds that we require for that takeoff. The V speeds you've probably heard of, V1, VR, V2, which the V1 speed is the speed at which we must already have made our decision whether we're going to continue the takeoff or stop. If something goes wrong, up to V1 we can stop. Beyond V1 we've got to go, because there ain't enough runway available for us to stop if something goes badly wrong after that speed. The VR speed, the rotate speed, is the speed that we rotate the aircraft into its flying attitude and leave the ground. That's about that's at maximum weight, it's about 190 miles an hour, 170 knots, and we leave the ground at about 200, 210 miles per hour. Now, the fuel on board, the fuel load that we carry, it's about 170 tons, and it's in all these tanks in the wing. Don't worry about the plumbing too much. It's quite a complicated system. I'll show you a simpler one in a minute. But we carry, as I say, 170 tons of fuel. The aircraft only weighs 400 tons at its maximum takeoff weight. So about 41%, 42% of the mass or the weight of that aircraft is fuel. and it all sloshes around in all these different tanks. As I say, that's about 48,000 imperial gallons. It's about 57,000 of your puny United States gallons. That's about 216,000 litres. Now, that's about 3,500 cars topping up with 60 litres at a time. So this is a simpler picture of what the fuel looks like. The wings are massive fuel tanks, basically. All the width of the wings, basically, is a fuel tank. A massive belly tank here as well, which holds about 38 tons on its own. And on the long-range 400 series jumbo, we also have a fuel tank in what's called the horizontal stabilizer, right at the back of the airplane here. That holds another 10 tons of fuel. So that is then pumped forward into the center tank at the appropriate time to keep the aircraft balanced on the center of gravity at its optimum. When you see the aircraft sitting on the ground and it's about to set off on a long flight, you probably notice that the wings actually hang downwards at the end like that. So when we reach our flying speed and we rotate the aircraft to take it into the air, you'll see those wings coming up. And the tips of the wings on the 747-400, they flex between 12 and 13 feet upwards from that fully laden position to transferring the weight onto the wings. It's about 12 to 13 feet, which is a heck of a lot. And I'm told that the new Dreamliner is even more. I haven't seen a figure for it, so I won't misquote anything for you. Now, the other thing which we have on the long-haul aircraft are what we call crew rest areas. Some passengers were kind enough to ask me if this was the members' lounge of the Mile High Club, so I had to disappoint them, unfortunately. What we have these on board for, not because we're lazy or sleepy or we've been on the beer the night before and we have to go to bed when we get on board and go to sleep, it's so that we can extend our duty periods, because you know by law that we have to stand down from flying duties after a certain period when we've been on duty. Now, we can do up to 19 hours from start to finish if we have these crew rest facilities on board. This is the cabin crew's rest area. And it's up in the tail of the aircraft on the jumbo. Sometimes you might see them if you're down the back. They open a little door and they vanish, and then you don't see them again. Where are they gone? They've gone for a little kip. Okay. Our rest area, that's not me, that's one of my colleagues. Our rest area is just behind the flight deck. Now, don't worry, it's not as if both pilots get out of the seats, engage the autopilot and go to bed, just leaving it to get on with it itself. If we're going to be doing that on a very long flight, we've got two sets of crews. We've got two captains and two co-pilots. We take it in turns to fly the airplane and go to bed, have a little rest, hopefully to get some sleep. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Anyway, that means that we can extend our duty period, which means that if something goes wrong, we can stay with that flight. They don't have to call out a standby crew and delay it even further. So that's the reason for that. Anyway, so we've been airborne now for about, 12 hours, I suppose, some 6,000 miles. You've had your rubbish dinner, you've had your rubbish breakfast, you've watched all the rubbish films, and you've probably had a couple of hours of rubbish sleep. And we're just really coming down over mainland China here. Will be handed over by the Chinese authority, by the Chinese air traffic control, to the Hong Kong area traffic controllers. Now, this is where they built the new airport on Lantau Island, but we're not going to go there today. That's far too easy. It makes life far too easier. We're going to go to the old one here, which was in Kowloon, just out in the bay, in this little bit here. That looks like a tooth hanging down there. In this little part of the harbour here, there was the runway which extended out into the bay. And it was not unique, but it was unusual and quite a demanding approach, this one. So when we were coming in, as I say, coming in over Shenzhen, somewhere up here, handed over by Chinese air traffic control to the Hong Kong authorities, we will then be coming in along this arrow line here. They will give us headings to fly to intercept this path here. And you can just make out that runway there, that very thin little yellow line there. That's the old runway there. So on the hill here, we've also got a thing called a checkerboard. It's like a chessboard, red and white checks on it. More about that in a minute. Now, this was called an IGS, an Instrument Guidance System. It's not a landing system. It would not land the aircraft for you. What we do is, I say, we come in from west to east until we see the checkerboard here on the hill, and then we must be visual, and we make a right turn at that point to get lined up with the runway, and there's the runway going out into the bay there. So it's quite a late turn in the approach. Most approaches are stabilized at 10 miles from touchdown. This one, we're less than 1.5 miles from touchdown when we have to start that maneuver. Now, this is our sort of book of the road, if you like, and this shows it pictorially, what we would be doing. This is our inbound track, and there's the checkerboard on the hill there. And then we start that turn to get lined up with the runway, which is aligned from northwest to southeast. The reason we do this, and you can see it here, is because these little green patches here, they show areas of high ground. So coming in from the north, we would like, obviously, just to come straight in on that line there to get lined up with the runway if we were coming in from Shenzhen there, down there to join the runway. But we would not have sufficient clearance to be able to make that approach as a straight-in approach. We would not have sufficient clearance on that high ground. So that's it, that's the track. And then when we get down to here, it says former airport there, and that's the runway just coming into sight there. That's the point that we're going to start making the turn, and this will all come into sense when I show you another slide in a minute. The thing with Hong Kong is, as I mentioned earlier on, weather at Hong Kong. We need a very accurate weather forecast because it can change drastically minute by minute, especially during the typhoon season, when you can have a typhoon going through and the wind can be all over the place. It can change speed and direction, and it makes life very, very awkward. Quite exciting, actually. So once we have flown this part of the approach and we've gone visual, we must have the runway in, sorry, we don't have to have the runway in sight now. What they've got round this corner here is flashing strobe lights, and the strobes flash in sequence to lead you round the corner. So if you keep those strobe lights right between your legs as you come round the corner, you will be on the correct curved path, descending the whole time towards the runway. So this is a guy doing exactly that as he comes round there. 2 or 3 points to notice here. We've got that high ground in the background up to the north and to the northeast, which is why we cannot fly the approach straight in. He's in his full landing configuration. He's got full flaps. He's got his undercarriage down. And there's that checkerboard, which used to be a mandatory part of the approach. It's not quite so important. I'm speaking as if this place is still open. It's not, but just to keep us active. This is one of our aircraft coming round that same corner there, and again you see that incredible high ground stretching up in the northeast at this time, and the tower blocks, of course, which we also have to take care to avoid those. Okay, this guy is 2/3 of the way around the corner. He'll probably start leveling his wings in a minute, and he will get lined up with the runway. Now, as I say, things can change quite drastically in Hong Kong. This guy that's the same picture, probably just from a slightly different angle, just looking towards the southeast there. And he's just about to roll his wings level there too. You can see an aircraft parked on the ground there as well. You could if this was working. There it is. There's an aircraft parked on the ground there too. Now, as I say, when you get very, very strong winds in Hong Kong, as I say, the runway is aligned northwest to southeast. If you get a southwesterly wind, as you come round that corner in that right turn, the danger is that you get blown through that center line there. That's the center line of the runway there. This guy has been blown through the center line by the wind. He either started his turn a little bit too late, or he didn't have enough bank angle on to get that turn absolutely nailed. And that's what a strong wind is going to do. It's going to blow you through that center line. You're then faced with a couple of options. You can either think, I've made a complete pig's ear of this. I shall now throw this approach away. I will climb out through this gap here. In fact, you don't need to go through the gap. You've got loads of gradient there to make the climb. Throw the approach away, go round, and air traffic control will feed you in for another approach, and you will learn by your mistakes from the second one. This guy decides, no, this is savable, so I'll do it. He's now recovering towards the center line there, and this one here, he's just overcorrected ever so slightly. He's just gone slightly to the other side of that center line there now, but he's just about to touch down. Safe place, safe landing, no problems. The potential problem he has at this stage is because he's got that very, very strong wind now blowing pretty well directly across the runway. That wind is getting underneath that wing, and it's trying to lift that right wing again. Not in itself a problem. The problem is this engine pod here on the other side is going to get very, very close to the runway. And it has happened that people have just scraped that pod on the runway. Not normally a problem. They take it off to the hangar, they take the nacelle cowling off, have a look, make sure everything's okay, put it all back together again, and redispatch the airplane. If it's had a real clout, of course, then they may have to look a little bit more closely and just see what the problem is. This is the iconic shot of the old Jumbo flying in between the apartment blocks. People used to say that you could come around the corner there, you could look into people's apartments, look in and see what they're having for lunch down there. And you would pick up the laundry, which is hanging out to dry here on the poles outside the apartments, and you would pick up the laundry on that right wingtip as you come round the corner. Occasionally we do get it wrong, of course, which is unfortunate, and we finish up getting our feet wet if we land a little bit long down the runway, or too fast, or if it's slippery or wet, or if his brakes aren't working properly. Then you can finish up going off the end of the runway, as happened in this one. They just deployed these slides, and the passengers, I think some of them got their feet wet. Others in this one just stepped from the slide into a rescue boat, and they were fine. The aircraft was rebuilt, back in service again 6 months later, so it wasn't a major catastrophe, that one. The captain just gets invited in for tea with the chief pilot.